Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a quick overview of expertise. Then we're going to talk about the knowledge you need to elicit from your expert. And we're going to talk about methods of knowledge elicitation. I'll give you an in-depth discussion of the critical decision method and a timely discussion about performing cognitive task analysis remotely. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Experts are people whose knowledge or performance in a given domain is superior to others. When compared to novices, the expert's knowledge is greater not only in quantity, but also in quality. After substantial work in their domain, experts have an excellent understanding of how things work in fundamental terms. This understanding is knowledge that is organized into schemas and stored in long-term memory. As experts continue working and practicing, those frequently performed tasks and schemas can become automated. By automated, I mean that the schema runs straight from long-term memory and never enters working memory. This means that A, those tasks don't take up any working memory, and B, this frees up extra working memory to deal with more complicated situations, and finally C, that because it doesn't enter working memory, the expert is no longer conscious that they are running through that mental process. This means that your expert can no longer tell you the full extent of what they are doing because it is no longer conscious thought. For your business, however, you need all your expert's information, not just some of it. That's where cognitive task analysis comes in. You already know how to get the standard walkthrough from your expert, organize that information in some fashion. So let's pick up from there. We'll say you have the walkthrough organized into steps. Now, for completeness, you need to elicit knowledge about each step of the task, and that means each and every one. You need your expert to tell you the sequence of actions necessary, the decisions that have to be made to complete each step, when a decision must be made, what are the alternatives to consider, and the criteria used to decide between the alternatives. You need to know the background information. You have to know all the concepts, processes, and principles that are the basis for the expert's approach. This is in the form of declarative knowledge or facts, or we'll simply put the way things are, what is. You have to find out the conditions or initiating events necessary to begin this whole procedure and each and every step for that matter. You need to know the equipment and materials that are required. You need insight on the sensory experiences for the expert. That is, what the expert smells, tastes, or feels, in addition to any visual or auditory cues. This could include almost anything: a subtle vibration, an odor, feeling a texture, or seeing the consistency of a product, any kind of sensory input. And finally, you have to know the performance standards. How long should this task take? How accurate does it have to be? In general, how do you know the job has been done properly? And to get all this, you have to have some method of knowledge elicitation. The knowledge elicitation methods generally follow one of these formats: observation and interviews. These can be somewhat informal. So you watch an expert and then you have a discussion about performance and method. It allows the cognitive task analyst the most flexibility. There's process tracing, which is more formal and structured. The analyst will give the expert a task and analyzes performance through think aloud and recall discussions. Then there are conceptual techniques. These are primarily done in academic settings. It's a very tightly structured method that provides formal knowledge representations of a domain, something like card sorting tasks, and maybe the ultimate goal is to get a concept map. So there has to be some kind of knowledge elicitation. So I'm going to talk most about the informal methods of observations and interviews. You can use normal interviews, but remember, the information you're trying to get has been automated. So the expert's initial response to your question may very well be either I don't know, or I don't do that. So you have to ask questions that can interrupt the expert's automaticity. This is done by directly asking and then moving forward and backward in the process timeline, and then circling back to the questions. There's no given formula, and each analyst must figure out how their own way works. The information then you're trying to get is the perceptual cues used in making the decision, the prior knowledge that was applied, the goals that they considered, the alternatives, and any other assessment factors. That's what you're trying to get here. Now, a common observation and interview technique is called the critical decision method. You ask the expert about some major event or unusual situation where they made a difference, they made a big impact. The two of you go through that situation in detail, talking about every step and comparing it to the knowledge representations you've previously made. If there's something missing, you have something to work on. During this discussion, you should take brief notes, but make a recording. Doing that allows you to focus more on the discussion and less on trying to make sure you take really accurate notes. So in this discussion, I would tell the expert something like this. Previously, you said step Y was next, but this time you've gone straight to step Z. Why is that? Oh, let's not worry about this now. Let's continue with what you were saying. And then I let them go on what they were doing. And then about 5 minutes later, at some natural stopping point, I'd go back to the expert and I say, let's go back to this from a moment ago. I think of it as a spiral. You touch on the topic and then come back to it. And you go forward, you go backwards. And by doing this, you should be able to interrupt the sequencing of steps, the way the mind is working, interrupt the automaticity. And it should allow, once the automaticity is interrupted, the expert will bring it into working memory and be able to tell you about it. And there's another approach called concepts process. It's a multi-stage interview approach and uses multiple experts. Each expert is asked to describe the same procedure. And then you have cycles of expert self-review and peer review of the results. This is a very long iterative process. The initial semi-structured interviews begin by defining the go, no-go conditions for the job, when it's okay to perform, when it's not, and then they describe the overall processes necessary for your ultimate goal. That is, who does what, when, and where. Next, the cognitive task analyst will elicit individual steps and decisions necessary to implement the process, and that's done with each expert. And then they'll find the alternative actions, what criteria are used, and you also try to get the necessary standards for performance, time and quality requirements, plus the tools and equipment. All this is much like you got from the last, like I discussed previously. You'll then ask the experts to explain the reasons for the steps from the interview. This includes the scientific principles that guide their thinking. Finally, you determine the concepts needed by those who perform the task, including names, symbols, and key events. After you've done this work with each expert, you transcribe everything and basically boil it down to a simple document. And then the expert again reviews their own material. And when you have all the experts okay with their own material, you merge the documents into one. And from this you create a series of steps and decision points. You've got step A and what your decisions are, and then you try to figure out with all your experts to try to figure out any omissions, any errors, any unnecessary steps. This is again an iterative process. And then and then when you're finally through with that, you get your final cognitive task analysis product, which is an agreement, a consensus among the experts on how they do their work. As we identified here, this is far beyond the basic interview techniques. It's By doing this process, however, it can be vital to your business continuity, or it can be used to create training that'll help students learn easier and quicker. This leads to efficiencies and a lower overall risk to your business. Okay, let's look at a different practicality. From current events, we've discovered the need for a contingency plan. What will we do when face-to-face communication is not feasible? I suggest using an online meeting platform, something like this, because of the affordances of this format. And what are these affordances? First, during the COVID-19 pandemic, great swaths of our population have by necessity become accustomed to online meetings. From this, you get safety or security advantages depending on what the expert's work environment is. Security being, if it's a secure facility, you don't have to pass the clearances. Safety being, say, a chemical plant. And second, you get scheduling flexibility. By having the analyst and the expert in their own home workplaces, they can divide the discussion into multiple shorter interviews spaced out over different days, which that's more difficult if they're both together, if somebody's traveled. This spacing allows your analyst time to actually analyze the contributions between sessions, potentially finding gaps in the captured knowledge or telltale signs of omissions. Finally, this method also allows the use of a camera to record expressions and body language. Although you can use cameras in face-to-face interviews, they can make some people nervous. And a note about cameras. Outside of professional studios and professional setups, interview cameras are notoriously ill-positioned, which brings up the point about how to position a webcam for optimal use. Whether it's a standalone webcam or one that's integrated into a laptop, you want it lined up eye level with your expert. You don't want the expert staring down at the camera and looking at the laptop screen, and you want to see the eyes, the face, and some of the upper torso. Once you'll begin to go through the actual interview or parts of it as described previously. And when done with the interview, you'll do your transcriptions and analysis. Then, and here's where the camera's advantages come in. You watch the interview again, but this time you're paying close attention, not to what the expert is saying, but the expert's body language and patterns of speech. Watch their eye and head movements. These can tell you when someone is or when I'm asked a question where I have to evaluate information before responding, I'll turn my head and eyes down to the right and I'll squint a few times. I'll blink and I'll think, and then I'll turn back and then I'll respond. Sometimes, when experts are trying to be forthcoming and helpful, they may try to fill in the blanks of their process. If what they're saying is preceded by a quizzical look, this may be the case. They may be trying to be helpful and they're getting what they think is plausible as opposed to what really they're doing. Now, watch their body language and also listen for pauses. For example, if you have an expert who is relatively still and doesn't use their hands much, say you have an expert who's relatively still and doesn't use their hands much. If when explaining something, they pause and then use a lot of hand gestures, this is a cue to pay attention and maybe revisit the topic in another interview. It's something that's just amiss. And using these kind of techniques with what we've already discussed, we can help you get a more thorough understanding of your expert's knowledge and performance process. Cognitive task analysis isn't just a simple interview technique, but the results are really well worth the effort. And while our discussion in these sessions focus on the expert, the real work in this process is the process to make sense of the expert's knowledge. If you need the analysis done, but aren't sure your in-house resources are up to the challenge. Radiant Digital is here to help you fill in the gaps. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Oh, great. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Sorry, excuse me. Let's open up the lines for some questions now. If you have a question, you can simply just type it into the chat, and I'll read them out loud to Dr. Mitchell. Okay, so we've got a few questions here. The first question, Dr. Mitchell, you mentioned that interview cameras are often poorly placed. What do you mean?
What you'll often have is an interview camera that's set up behind the interviewer and to their left, somewhere way back here is the camera. Then your expert doesn't know where to look. They don't know where to look at the camera or to look at the interviewer. And what you're missing is some of the subtle cues that the eyes can give you. And it's even worse if the camera is, say, on a table and looking up at the expert. Then it's really missing a lot of their body language and their actions.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes sense. Okay, here's another question from the chat. This sounds like a lot of work for the experts. How do they usually react?
The answer to that is it depends. A lot of experts, they may need to be primed to understand the importance of what they're going through. It is not only fatiguing, but it can be actually irritating to have your thought processes interrupted like that, and to be interrupted while some of it to you is automated. It's not fun, but it's important to be able to get that knowledge. So your expert needs to be on board to be able to participate fully, and understand going into it that it's not just an easy interview. It's not simple.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and do one more question from the chat. It says here, you talked about using the critical decision method. Why pick an unusual event instead of a typical event?
Well, going with something that happened that's unusual. Your expert is more likely to remember the sequence of events. When you ask them, what was your typical day like? Because a lot of the typical process is already automated, you're going to get some missed information. They're going to glaze over a lot. So going for the unusual, you're getting the pieces that the expert has that your average worker doesn't have. This is where they shine. This is the information that they have that makes them the asset that they are. And you're trying to get that information, which the other people may not have. So you're trying to get that special knowledge where they really, really have made the difference. And that's one of the main reasons for cognitive task analysis.
Okay, okay, thank you. All right, that looks like all the questions that we've got. You will be able to find a link to this recording on our radiant.digital website. I'd like to go ahead and thank Dr. Sheila Mitchell for doing this presentation for us again today. And thanks for everybody in our audience for joining us. All right, have a good day.
Thank you.